Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Cry Oneness, a show where you can share your miracles, your poetry, your music, share your lives. Cry Oneness with Joe Avalos, your host, and we're going to have Tony on this evening sharing his 50,000 miracles, at least some of them. And I'd like to start the show, as we always do, with the Cry Oneness poem, actually, Oneness Prayer, written by Thomas Merton. So while I read this prayer, please allow your heart to continue to soften and let love flow through you toward another person or situation in your life that you are not happy with. A prayer for forgiveness. O God, we are one with you. You have made us one with you. You have taught us that if we are open to one another, you dwell in us. Help us to preserve this openness and to fight for it with all our hearts. Help us to realize that there can be no understanding where there is mutual rejection. O God, in accepting one another wholeheartedly, fully, completely, we accept you, and we thank you, and we adore you, and we love you with our whole being. Because our being is in your being. Our spirit is rooted in your spirit. Fill us then with love, and let us be bound together with love as we go our diverse ways, united in this one spirit which makes you present in the world and which makes you witness to the ultimate reality that is love. Love has overcome. Love is victorious. And I would add, God is love. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, just a little bit on the four things that this Cry Oneness was supposed to do, four principles of Cry Oneness. Number one is to cry out the word, what we're doing tonight, sharing miracles. Number two is to believe in miracles. Number three is don't lose heart. And number four is use the narrow gate. Last week's show was dedicated to Anthony Johnson, my friend who was killed in an automobile accident. And thank you for your prayers. Last week we had some very nice guests, a blind couple, Phil McGalnick and his wife. They did a great job. They're probably listening tonight. They said they were going to be. And tonight we have a very good guest who's on in our virtual studio already. I found out from Sebastian last week that we can have up to 1,000 people conference calling in. So we'll get your friends to start calling in, but first it would be nice if any one of you would call in. So the number to call, not tonight because we have a full schedule of talking and sharing miracles between Tony and myself, but write down this number and get ready for next week, 515-604-9344. The phone will ring and a computer lady will answer you and say, please enter the code. So the next step is to enter 914121, which is the code, followed by the pound sign. Then that very nice lady will ask you to announce yourself. And as soon as you announce yourself, I'll hear you talking, and I'll welcome you to the show. So, Tony, welcome to the show, and thank you for agreeing to be on Cry Oneness and to share about your new book. Tony has this new book out called 50,000 Miracles. It's available on Kindle and Amazon, at Amazon.com, and it's also available at En Route Publishing. Google En Route Publishing, and you can also buy it there. Tony, welcome to Cry Oneness.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. It's an honor to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Okay, I guess we'll start by asking you a question.
All right.
Tell us something about your background and your career.
All right, Joe. Before I get to answer that, let me just point out that if I sound like I'm trying to change anyone's religion tonight, I am not. My whole quest in life is to help people become a friend of God, and then if you become a friend of God, He'll direct you to the correct religion. So I'm not trying to change anyone's religion. You can just be confident. I'm trying to convince people to become a friend of God. That's the purpose of my book. Second, just in case some people cannot stay with us and they can't hear this talk, they can find out a lot by just Googling the title of the book. So I'll just give them that information. just Google the title of the book, which is Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. One more time, just Google Tony's 50,000 Coincidence Miracles. All right, and then to your question now, Joe, a little bit about me. I was born and raised in a working class, a middle class working class. I was born and raised a Catholic. I did attend the Catholic schools all the way up to high school. When I got to the age of 24, I had gotten married at the age of 19. I was raising a family already by the age of 24. And out of necessity, because I was married young, I had to go to college nights. I attended college 3 nights a week. Obviously, tests and things I had to study for. I was holding down 3 jobs, 1 full-time and 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet. My wife was a tremendous support during this process, but after we had our first child, things got a little hectic and stressful. So I went to God and prayed to Him and asked Him to help me. And I realized at the age of 24 that although I was praying to God and asking Him, I was not confident and positive. I guess nobody's really positive until you ask, but I was a God. And at the age of 24, after all my education, I was in a quandary. So I needed help. I was asking Him to help me, and I needed to be sure He was there. So what I did was I went to Him and pleaded with Him to help me, and with amazing success. Today I'm age 75. I'm semi-retired. I am the president of a business consulting, business coaching firm, which helps people to solve problems, as I have over the last 51 years in business. I have a brother who's 5 years older than me. He's 80 years old. I had 2 siblings who passed away before I was born. An interesting part of that event was I had a brother who passed away before I was born, but he passed away on the Feast of Good Friday. So during my life, and still to this day, every time we get to Good Friday and we're celebrating and commemorating our brother Jesus died, I was brought up with an annual event where the whole family was gloomy about a brother dying. So it augured well for me to celebrate the Easter season. I married my high school sweetheart. We were married for 53 years, a wonderful marriage. She was a tremendous woman. Unfortunately, she's passed away. It's been 3 years now. But I hasten to add, my marriage with her was a miraculous event, and even the day of her passing was surrounded with miracles in such a way that my 3 children and I are certain that she's in heaven. Even since then, we've seen evidence that my wife is in heaven. So although I miss her terribly, she was a wonderful second half of me. I'm just so happy to know that she's in heaven. So I have 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. As I said, I attended college 11 years nights to get my degrees. I got my degrees from Quinnipiac University, ultimately. And I spent about 35 years in accounting, auditing, cost controls, profit controls. I became a controller, an accounting controller in several companies. Your listeners may know that accounting controllers really help to run the business because when things are out of control, they have to catch it, they have to fix it, you have to keep things from going out of control. I say all that because being a controller augurs well for helping you to become a president of companies, and I did. I became a president of 4 companies in my life. I share these aspects because when I get into miracles, you may wonder if I'm a regular person, and indeed, I've had a career of 51 years as a regular person, became a president of 4 companies, worked for some fantastic companies with some great people, companies like Timex Watches, Johnson & Johnson, Clairol Hair Coloring, and Remington Electric Shavers. And when I became president, it was because I had a reputation for being a good controller, able to control things, and as it turns out, I was called by 4 companies over time that were going bankrupt and needed to get turned around. And so God came with me, of course, as you'll hear later. It was God's grace and God's wisdom that helped me to save these companies. So for the past 15 years, though, I've been this business consultant, business coach, helping leaders to turn things around, profit-wise, etc. But ultimately, I have to reveal to them, the source of my wisdom is God, and I reveal that. And I've helped several companies and several presidents now who also now run their companies by asking God what to do. As your opening prayer indicated, Joe, we are with God all the time, and we coexist with Him. And so if that's true, and I know it's true, there's no problem too great for us to talk to Him about and to get His wisdom about. I have 45 years experience being a Christian evangelist. I've been an author. I taught Sunday school, CCD Sunday school, for 45 years. And an interesting sidelight of that is I was inspired by God to realize over the 45 years I've had 1,000 students, and many of them are grandparents today. So if you want to do something for God, teach Sunday school, because it impacts so many people, 1,000 people and their families and their friends, etc. Is there something you want me to clarify, Joe, or a question you would like to ask at this point?
I would like to say, if you have 1,000 students, you should have them all call in, because this conference call that we're on can handle 1,000 audience. So have them call in and join us someday. But I have a question for you.
All right.
Well, I don't have a question, but I have another comment, then I'm going to ask you a question. Sounds like you had a lot of good orderly direction in your life before you even got serious about God. God is good orderly direction, and if you can practice good orderly direction, you're already being a part of God, aren't you?
That's true. That's where it comes from. He is orderly. You're right, Joe.
Right. People who don't have God in their lives are all over the place, like I used to be before I found Him. So I want to ask you this question. Do you have any... What got you interested in becoming a Christian evangelist? You did that for 51 years while still working. How'd you handle all that?
All right. Well, thanks, Joe. Good question. Like most people, I mentioned that crisis at the age of 24. I had a lot of stresses and anxiety, and everybody I've met in my life has had stressful moments. Even the great saints have had stressful moments. I think God uses that as an opportunity for us to go to Him. There's nowhere else to go. When you reach... even Alcoholics Anonymous takes people through a program to a higher power. When you have nowhere else to go but to God, you do find God. Unfortunately, people wait till it's too late, as I did probably too, except thank God it happened to me at 24. So life was stressful. As I said, I was working 3 jobs, and I was going to school nights. But what happened at 24 was my wife had to stop working because our first child arrived, and so that cut my income down. So that's why I started working 3 jobs. We also had just purchased a new house, and we had a mortgage, and on top of the mortgage, I had the chores of upkeep of a house that I did not have before. So things got a little crazy. Then when my wife stopped working, it got crazier. So the stresses were pretty bad. I think most people have gone through that unless you were born extremely wealthy. So I pleaded with God, as I said. Now, what happened was, promptly, as soon as I pleaded with God in all sincerity, and I said some things I was not too proud of, which I cite in my book. I put the whole statement that I went through about an hour and a half of complaining and pleading with God for help. In a Catholic church, an empty church one night, I spent an hour and a half babbling. But like within one day, things started happening. The most significant thing that happened was I got a call from a headhunter, a recruiter, and he said he could not tell me who had given him my name and my credentials, but he had me as the perfect match for an ideal job that he had open. And so he told me all about it. Indeed, it was a fantastic job. I went to the first interview and got the job on the spot. It was a perfect match. And my salary, my income went up by 30%. So that was in 2 days of complaining to God for help. That certainly solved a lot of my problem. And I was, going to school nights, and at the time I was studying biology, law, and accounting all at once in that semester. And suddenly I seemed to have gotten more wiser and able to handle the homework and the tests and was getting good grades. So I'm trying to answer your question, why did I evangelize and how did that work? Well, after God gives you miracles and things like a secret person putting you in touch with a job that gives you a 30% raise and your intelligence seems to have grown quickly, you start to find God and notice God. On top of that, I started to notice daily signs and daily clues. Like I would think something and it would happen. I would think about something and it would happen. I would open the Bible at random and my eyes would land on something I just thought about, 5 minutes before opening the Bible. So I got a lot of these clues and nudges and promptings from God that he was showing me that he really was real, because you might remember my point to God when I was babbling, I said, things like, I don't even know if you're there. I've gone to Catholic schools. I've been taught about you. I've been following the routines, but I have no idea if you're really there hearing me. And I'm not getting any help, so, I'm feeling like you're not really there. Well, so I guess God set out and said, well, I'll have to pull something out of my library and make sure Tony knows that I really exist, and that's what he did. Now, after many years of seeing these clues and miracles, I've learned something that's, I guess, common sense. When somebody finds God and becomes a friend of God as a close personal friend, and that's the goal of Christianity. As you said in your prayer, even when we opened up, Joe, the goal of Christianity is that each one of us becomes another Jesus Christ, with him coexisting within us. And St. Paul said in Scripture, after about 30 years of him being tutored by Jesus, because he was not one of the original 12 apostles, St. Paul said, it's Christ who taught me. I've been taught by Christ. He knows the things he knows. So he knew what the apostles knew, but he was taught by Jesus. And to Paul, that was pretty clear. There was a God and there was a Jesus. But then he says, after 30 years, he said, let no one trouble me any further, because it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. So that's the goal of Christianity, to have Christ coexist so much with us that people recognize Christ more than they see us. St. Francis of Assisi had the stigmata, the 5 wounds of Christ on his body, as a sign to us that St. Francis was so holy that God was showing us, look, folks, this guy is so much like me. He's even stamped with my signs on his body. Padre Pio as well, St. Catherine Siena as well, St. Rita of Cascia as well. So many saints, about 20 saints have had the stigmata to tell us it is possible to become like Christ. So what happens at that point? You become an evangelist because of a simple reality. You're surrounded by people who don't believe in God, don't know God, and it's heartrending when you talk to them, when you're in the company of people who don't know God, don't believe in him, don't know that all your problems can be taken to him and he can work miracles to help you. You have no choice but to say, look, I have to tell you the truth. Jesus lives in you. He loves you, etc. So that's why I became an evangelist. I was seeing miracles every day. I learned how to talk to God and listen to God as my friend. Now that's why I wrote the book I wrote, because God inspired me that, look, if a person can talk to God and hear God, then they have everything they could possibly need. You can even say, God, I don't know if you're there and I don't believe in you anymore. You can say that and he'll answer you. You'll have everything you need. You have a problem. You ask him for what should you do, and he tells you what to do. So that's why God had me write the book after 51 years of being tutored by him. And I learned a few amazing things. For example, the word inspired. The first time that word was ever used on the planet, somebody said, I was inspired, or I just had an inspiration. The first time it was ever used, we can sense what he meant, because he or she, the word inspired is really 2 words. It's the word in, and then it's the word spired, or spiration. So inspiration is an inflow, a coming in of the Holy Spirit. That's why the person said, I was inspired, he obviously meant the Spirit of God just came into me and inspired me, gave me an idea. The other word, idea, is also two words. It's the word I, and then the word Deo. Deo is the Latin word for God. So the first person who said, hey, I just had a great idea, what did he mean? He meant that I just received God, a Deo, and so those two words, inspired and idea, every time I hear them, it makes me realize we do coexist with God. I even took some college courses after I was, learning a lot about God from God himself, like St. Paul, like all of us. All of us, Jesus said in Scriptures, every one of you has one teacher. So the Holy Spirit is the teacher of all of us, whether it be through another person or through a book or whatever. So I took some college courses to get some concrete, solid evidence about religion and the existence of God as well. And got a lot of confirmations there, too. So all that taken together, Joe, I guess when I was in the company of people who didn't believe in God, I couldn't help but be an evangelist. I did it wrong, as many of us do. We get too headstrong, we get too pushy, etc. I mellowed after the first 10 years and got a little more creative on how to be careful how you evangelize people. But my whole quest, evangelists, what they do really is they just share their presence of God with other people. So hopefully that answered your question.
Witness. I see you have 3 miracles a day. Tell me about that. That's in this section, right? 3 miracles a day. Bob Olson told me that. If you don't have 3 miracles a day, you're not really in the Spirit. So that's in this section, too. So I believe when we witness our miracles, we're talking about God, because no miracle can happen unless God's causing it, if he does it through people. So the next question I'm supposed to ask you is about the book, but this whole show is about people sharing their miracles, and I wish more people would call in, but you're doing a great job of convincing me that miracles happen all the time. I knew that,
right. But
in my case, it was like Paul. I had to get knocked off my horse. He came and knocked me off my horse and told me stop killing his people, So that's how I started. But you've had a nice gradual coming of the Lord. I had a drastic one. But he gets everybody a different way. And we think we're coming to get him, but he really comes and gets us when we're ready. So the next question is, what inspired you to write this book?
All right. Great point. I'm glad we're getting to that. And by the way, I love your comment a minute ago about we think we're going to get him, but he comes to get us. It's like the poem, The Hound of Heaven, very much the case. I found that too. Everybody I know that knows Jesus, they would agree with you, Joe. God was following them and trying to nudge, because God is present with each one of us. So that leads me into answering your question. God is with us 24 hours a day, even when we don't know him. He's there because he loves us. So here's what happened. It was amazing what happened. Again, I should remind your listeners, if they can't stay with us and hear all these comments about miracles coming up, I'll be sharing some amazing miracles. But if they can't stay with us, they should Google the title of the book, Tony's 50,000 Co-Incidence Miracles. And in order to answer your question, I need to clarify a couple things. Let's see. The book itself, you asked what and got me to write a book. The book itself explains all of that very, very clearly. As a matter of fact, in the first half hour of reading, and I should say, God designed the book, how it should be written, the way it should be written, where the chapters are, which miracles, out of the 50,000 miracles, which ones to put into the book, etc. And he inspired me to put in the first half hour of reading to convince people how to talk to God, how they can hear God, how they can be sure that they're hearing God's voice. So many of the readers have commented back and sent me emails, etc., being grateful that they learn how to talk to God in the first half hour of the book, so that as they're reading the rest of the book, they're getting inspirations and they're having discussions with God in the rest of the book. So I'm very happy to say that happened. So I want to get that out of the way, especially since when you asked the question, what made me write the book, you see, the real answer is God told me to write the book, as I'll explain now. But I couldn't tell you God told me until I told your audience that if they're not talking to God, that's their problem. God wants to talk to every one of us. So what happened was God asked me some questions one day. While I was meditating, I was talking to him. We were talking about many things. I talk to God every day. I go to Mass every morning, and I spend about an hour after Mass talking to him about things, what he wants me to do, and how to do the things he wants. So one particular day, while I was talking to him, he said, "Tony, how many miracles a day do you experience?" And I never thought about it. I never really thought about it. Some days I get 10 miracles a day. But I thought about it. In order to give God an answer, I said, well, God, I'm sure I could say on average 3 miracles a day without any doubt in my mind. I have no doubt in my mind. And since I wrote the book, every time I get a miracle, I jot it down. So I know I get at least 3 still after writing the book. And then he said, well, Tony, how many miracles a year is that? 3 miracles a day. Well, I never thought of that either, but I'm an accountant, so I multiplied 365 days times 3, and I got 1,000. So I said, wow, that really blew my mind. I was having miracles for 51 years, and I never knew I get 1,000 miracles a year. I got excited. And then he said, I guess to put the frosting on the cake, well, how many miracles has that been in 51 years? I said, wow, I'm still an accountant. That's 51,000 miracles. So then he said, Tony, do you think I gave you 50,000 miracles so you could take them to the grave with you? Do you think that's why I gave you 50,000 miracles? You're 75 years old now. What are you going to do with all this knowledge of all these miracles? And as I was thinking of that, he said, that's why I've been prompting you for the last few years to write a book, but I was reluctant to write a book. So he was nudging me and prompting me. So then he said to me, all right, how about if you do this, Tony? See, I talk to God very colloquially. He is my friend. What he did for me, Joe, was he created a perfect friend for me. In other words, he behaves in such a way with me. He lets me talk to him. If I want to talk about accounting problems, he likes to talk about accounting. Whatever I want to, what I want to do, like if I want to go bowling or I want to go to a movie, that's where he wants to go. He's just been a perfect friend, and I think he does this for everybody. So what he said to me, in order to get me to write this book, he says, well, how about if you do this? How about if you write a diary for your family? You've got 3 children, you've got 5 grandchildren, you've got 2 great-grandchildren. How about if you just write a diary so at least they'll know the experiences you've had? So that's how it began. I started writing a diary. And after I wrote the diary, he just impressed upon me, Tony, he gave me a mission. And I'm going to get into that now so you'll know that the process was, he was nudging me for years to write a book. He tells me he gave me 50,000 miracles, not for me to take to the grave, and he made me feel responsible. And then he said, well, all right, write it. He gave me a break, you see. He was being a good friend. He gave me a break. Like, don't write a book. Why don't you just write a diary? And that was to get me to that process. Like you said, Joe, he comes after us, and he solves our problems. All right, so now I got it, right? Now suddenly I said, wow, I got it. Now I understand. I figured out why I got a mission, and here it is. My mission is there's 7 billion people on the planet Earth, 7 billion people. And I noticed many of them don't notice God at all, don't think about him at all. And I realized, wow, my mission is God is sad, God is hurt, God is offended, and he doesn't deserve this treatment. You see, he's giving 3 miracles a day to everybody on the planet at least, maybe 10 miracles a day to people on the planet, but they don't say thank you. They don't notice them. Sometimes they walk right over them and step on them. It's like on Christmas morning, he puts all these gifts out under the tree and people don't even open them, or if they open them, they don't acknowledge that he did it for them. And so I said, my mission is to publicize this, tell people, convince people, because I have all this ammunition of 50,000 miracles, convince people that God. And then he said, Tony, that's close, but it's not exactly correct. And I felt like he was very serious. You see, Jesus is so perfect to me. I can tell when he's happy with me and when he's happy with something and when he's sad. And he was being very, very serious-minded. He said, That's not exactly it, Tony. And then he shocked me, and I think this is going to shock your audience. He shocked me, because here's what he said, and I have no way of debating this. I have no way of proving this. All I know is after talking to him for 51 years, here's what he said. He said 3 billion of the 7 billion are not going to make it to heaven. And that was shocking, because I would never say such a thing. But he said it. 3 billion are not going to make it. He said
3 billion out of how many?
3 billion out of 7 billion. And I thought about it for quite a while since. You know, when you're in the company of 10 people, you'll probably find that three people of the 10 people, average people, are not paying attention to God. They don't talk to Him. They don't go to church. They don't pray. They don't read the Bible. You know, 3 out of every 10. But anyway, you know, Jesus said to me, the reason why the 3 billion are not going to make it is because they don't talk to me, because they don't ask me what to do, because they don't listen to me. They don't follow my nudges and my promptings. So the reason why people are not getting to heaven is because they don't put themselves into my existence. They don't let me live with them. That's the reason. So, all right. And then he said, therefore, they get tricked. They get tricked and confused like Adam and Eve got tricked. Adam and Eve were with me in the Garden of Eden, and we were friends, and they got tricked. Imagine, if they got tricked, how you'll be tricked if you don't come to me and seek my wisdom. So now he gave me the mission. So then he gave me this other example that was heart-rending. I hope I say it. When he said it to me, it brought tears to my eyes, so I hope I say it effectively. But here's the example he gave me. He said, Tony, imagine a perfect mother. And I personally had a perfect mother, and my wife was a perfect mother, so I know what a perfect mother looks like. And he said, imagine a perfect mother. She has 5 children who never listen to her, like people don't listen to me. She gives them advice, and they ignore it, or they debate it, or they tell her she's wrong, as people do with me. They never ask for advice. They won't call her on the phone because they don't want to engage with her. They don't visit her anymore. So imagine this perfect mother who loves 5 children, as a perfect mother does, going through this heart-rending pain. And furthermore, now watch this now, Tony. One of the 5 is an alcoholic. The other one is on drugs. Another one is a thief. He's constantly stealing and getting arrested. All of them are liars. Most of them have been in jail for an extended period of time. A couple of them have had car accidents, and they're in hospitals, and they're crippled. And that's the state of this poor mother's heart. That's the state of her heart. She's sad, cries all the time, prays for them. She doesn't. Now, Tony, I have 7 billion children, 7 billion friends. I got 3 billion of them who are just like this mother's 5, and that's the situation. So now he said, imagine the pain and the sadness of the perfect mom, and then notice me and multiply that by 3 billion people who are ignoring me and being tricked as well. And then he said, Tony, that's only this current generation, 3 billion people. This has been happening to me for the last 2,000 years. Imagine how many people have not made it to heaven. So I tell you, Joe, it really propelled me into, I learned from Jesus that he made me an expert. He made me an expert on miracles. He made me an expert on you can talk to God, you can hear God, and that's the problem. We have to talk to him, we have to listen to him. And I want to put a summary point here because it's very valuable at this point. You see, Jesus gave me this mission at the beginning of the book. The mission was, Tony, you are an expert. You have to convince people. And I didn't believe him. I couldn't accept that I'm an expert in anything religious and spiritual. But he convinced me. He made me an expert after 51 years with 3 miracles a day. And he did it for a purpose. He made me an expert at talking to him and listening to him. And then when I finished the book was all done, ready to go to the publisher. Jesus said to me, Tony, I want you to go to those 2 books, and I want you to open them at random. The first book was Imitation of Christ, a very amazing, well-known priest used it in the seminary. It's called Imitation of Christ. It's all filled with are all filled with conversations, as you know, Jesus talking to Thomas à Kempis. So that was one book. The other book is called He and I, He being God and I. That's another famous book. They're both stamped with the imprimatur of the church, meaning they're error-free. And he said, I want you to go open them at random, Tony, because I have a message for you that you won't believe unless you see it twice. So I went to the books. I opened them where he told me to put my fingernails. And both books, when I opened at random, said the same mission he gave me at the beginning of the book. So I have no doubt this book was written by Jesus. All right, hopefully that answers your question, Joe, unless you want me to clarify something.
No, that's good. So I love that. You know, St. Therese had that book on her nightstand, and Padre Pio used that book too, Imitation of Christ, correct?
Exactly right. Yeah.
It's very, and I read that book. That's one of the books that I was told to read. So it's interesting. So
yeah, it's a great book. Great book to
questions I might have for you after this. Not a question, but I think you might be a little bit low on your miracles. I mean, in addition to the type of miracles you're talking about, I get a miracle, and we're having it right now. And the first man had it, Adam and Eve. And it happens 7,884,000 times in a year. And it's one of the biggest gifts. Every breath is a miracle. Because when the Spirit leaves us, there's no breath left in us. Because when God departs, we can't even breathe without Him.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Good point, John.
I'm just joking around with you a little bit, but of course I've been getting 3 miracles a day too. But it all depends on what you perceive as a miracle. And when you think a breath is a miracle, it's really humbling.
Beautiful.
Some people, that's the only miracle they have. They just have to see it. But when they lose it, they certainly know it was a miracle. Just like everything else, when we lose something, we know how valuable it was. Some of us have to wait till we lose everything, till we know how valuable a small thing is.
You know, you raised a great point, Joe. You bring up the term miracle. In the last 51 years, when I share miracles, people have a tough time understanding what a miracle is. So I've come up with God's help, a simple answer. What is a miracle? And you look it up in Webster's dictionary, and the definition matches this, but what is a miracle? A miracle is very simply this. It's something that you see or something you sense or experience that you know God did. That's how simple it is. If you know God did it, it doesn't matter if 10 people around you disagree with you. If you say God did it, it's a miracle, because that's what a miracle is. It's an action of God.
So I guess the question is, what is the goal and purpose of your book, Tony's 50,000 Co-Incidence Miracles? What do you hope to achieve with this book, or what does God hope for you to achieve with this book?
Okay, great. It's much like what the mission was, and then the confirmation of the mission. And the goal is to convince readers that God really exists. It has to do that. It has to convince every reader that reads this book, whether they're an atheist or not, they're going to end the book knowing God exists. He has to exist for what they'll read in this book. It also convinces people that God loves us, because what God did for me in 51 years can be only seen as God totally loving human beings. The next thing is that God made us to be His friends. I mean, He could have made us to be slaves or robots or whatever, tools in His tool chest, but He made us to be friends. And He takes, as you pointed out, Joe, He does all the work in making us friends. He just needs us to be pliable. He took the 12 apostles, and if you read the stories of the 12 apostles, you can see that God made them His friends. He even took Judas and made Judas His friend. So God's out to be our friend. Matter of fact, Jesus calls us friends twice. In John 15, verse 15, and John 17. He clearly says He's our friend. The next thing is to convince people that they can talk to God and they can hear God anytime they want to. They don't have to set up an appointment. They don't have to travel any place. God's always available. And then the book is the goal is to help people notice their miracles. The 100 miracles that are cited in the book, and there's some ancillary miracles besides, so there's 100 plus, but they will help the reader to see that they are also experiencing these kinds of things, and they have not called them miracles perhaps, but I'm going to be sharing a few of those before we finish today. Now, so that's kind of the goals. The purpose might be better explained as the process of the book, so I'll tell you that quickly. The process is to show in the first half hour, as I said, first half hour that people can talk to God. That's important, because the rest of the book will never make it if people don't believe that Tony, I spoke to God for 51 years. They'll never believe it unless they know they could talk to God too. So they'll be able to talk to God after the first half hour. The next thing that's very, very important is the book also very carefully proves to the reader how to tell if it's God's voice or not. I would think, Joe, that your listeners up already are asking themselves, well, how does Tony know that it wasn't the devil? I mean, how do you know the devil's not talking to you? Well, that's a very important question. And I can tell you that in the first few years that I was talking to God, it occurred to me all the time, is that God or is that the devil or is it my own mind? And anybody talking to God is going to have that question. So God had me put in the book, how will you know that it's really God's voice talking to you? And that's covered very carefully. It's called, actually, when you get to the book, it's called fleecing because of General Gideon's fleece in the Bible, which most people know about. But that's how you can make sure God is talking to you. The next thing in the process is that God, as you said, again, Joe, God comes to meet us and he works at it. As I've said, he wants to make us his friend. Well, here's what happened while I was writing the book. 13 times, at least 13 times, Jesus broke in, stopped me from what I was doing and said, change that or move the paragraphs or take that miracle out, put this miracle in instead. So he came and inspired me to do that. And right after I did what he said, 13 times, I got a confirmation, like I got a phone call from someone who said the same thing, or the front page of the newspaper said the same thing, or the television that night said the same thing. So 13 times, and I listed them all in the book, so the readers, as they read it, they'll hear all these episodes. Jesus said to change it, and right after I did what he said, I got a confirmation. One amazing moment, it just came to mind just now, was he asked me to type the chapter and verse of a scripture passage. It was in Genesis. He said, insert what chapter and verse it is. So as I started to type it, as I was typing each number in the chapter and verse, I had EWTN Catholic Television on at the moment, and the priest was reading the same numbers. I said Genesis 18. I was typing Genesis 18, and the priest was saying it simultaneously as I typed each digit. It was not afterward, but it was simultaneous. Another part in the process is to explain the 100 miracles in my life and to convince people that they are also getting these same kinds of miracles. Otherwise they'd just be listening to somebody, talk about wonderful stories like watching a wonderful movie. But I need them to internalize that they also can have these experiences. And you know what? They don't have to wait 5 years. They don't have to wait 6 months. They don't have to go buy 6 more books. They don't have to enter a program and study and go away to a seminar. They don't have to do that. They just have to do it. For example, people have trouble. They'll tell me they're having trouble talking to God and hearing God. And the answer to that is very simple. Here's how simple it is. And I say it in the book. If you ask God a question, and he loves you, and he made you, and he's with you, coexisting with you, and you ask him a question, you have no problem. The rest of the event, his answering is his problem. And he's God, so he'll make sure you get the answer. You just have to worry about asking the question and listening for the answer. Also a process in the book was that Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary and Jesus both sent me confirmations as I was writing the book that they also wanted those messages delivered. And I put that in the book as well. As a matter of fact, right on the cover, on the front cover and the back cover, I also cited that Our Lady of Medjugorje has confirmed the mission of this book by something she said 3 days after I wrote the book. I had to call the book back from the printer, back from the people that were creating the book for me because I had to put that on. Jesus said, call the book back and cite that Mary has confirmed it. So I did do that. Okay, so I guess the last point is to help everyone know, every person, no matter what age you are. You know, I've been teaching Sunday school. I teach typically the graduating class, but the 12, 13-year-old person, they're able to comprehend that they can talk to God and they can hear God. So hopefully that answered it well enough, Joe, I think, eh?
That's really good, Tony. Let's get on to the next question because we're starting to run a little bit late. So I know you have 100 flabbergasting miracles in the book. Can you give us a representative sample of some of those miracles, too?
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, the first one I'd like to share is called the New Heart Miracle. It's in the book, and I try to be brief because we are running out of time. I had a few miracles I would like to cover. So the New Heart Miracle, here's what happened. 3 o'clock one morning, this was about 40 years ago, so I was into this maybe for 10 years of talking to God. Woke me up 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, Tony, I want you to go down to the kitchen. I want you to write a letter to your father-in-law who's having heart surgery the next morning. And I complained. I said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Can't we do this later? But my best friend, Jesus, gently got me to go downstairs in spite of myself. And there I was in the kitchen, and I said, geez, Lord, how do I write this letter to somebody having heart surgery? He said, why don't you do this? Why don't you say, I'm going to pray for you to have a brand new heart. I'm going to pray for God to create a brand new heart in you. And as I started to write that, I heard the record player go on in the living room. And I heard the turntable turning. I heard the arm come over and cranking over. I heard the needle hit the record. And the record was a song, and the first words that were sung said, create in me a new heart, O God. I got goosebumps because I was writing, create in me a new heart, create for him a new heart, and the record player went on. I got up to go see who played a trick on me and turned the record player on. Jesus said, but Tony, who would know what you're thinking except me? They couldn't play a joke on you. And sure enough, my 3 kids were sleeping. My wife was sleeping. The record player went on at 3 o'clock in the morning while I was writing what it sung. The next miracle I would cite is... That's
one of the praise and worship songs I sing quite a bit.
That's Psalm 51 to music, right? It's Psalm 51. The next miracle was a client box miracle. I've been doing business coaching, business consulting now for a while. I had a client I had for 2 years. Went in on a Monday morning to make a presentation. When I got there Monday morning, got to his office, there were like 50 boxes, 49 or 50 boxes scattered all over his office. Normally his office is very posh, very pristine, well-kept. Papers all over the place. I was dumbfounded. One of his employees said, Tony, he's a basket case. He's been here all weekend. He got a call on Friday. This was Monday morning now, but he got a call on Friday. He was being sued for an amazing amount of money. He had to find the original copy of a contract in order to stop the suit. The lawyer needed the contract Monday, no later than Monday, and he was frantic. He couldn't find it. He didn't even go home. He was there all weekend going through these boxes. So in compassion, I started praying for this client. We've been together for 2 years. We both experienced miracles, and I was praying for him and, really feeling for him. And Jesus said, look at the box next to your left foot. So I looked at the box next to my left foot. He said, take the yellow folder out. There was like 15 folders, 14 manila ones, 1 yellow one. I pulled the yellow folder out, and there was the contract right on top, in the box next to my foot. And as I was looking at the contract, the president comes walking in. I said, I got it. I showed it to him. Needless to say, he was ecstatic. That's the client box miracle. The next miracle is called peaceful surroundings. When I'm consulting with presidents and business leaders, I need to get them at least 1 mile away from the office, because otherwise, I've learned over the years, 15 years of consulting with them, and I've experienced it in my life myself. When you're having problems with work, problems with business, it's like being in a foxhole in the middle of a war. You're on the front lines in a foxhole, and I got to get you out of there and get you at least 1 mile away from the war front so I can talk to you. So that's what I try to do. I had one diehard president. I could never get him out of the office, but one day I convinced him. So he agreed. I said, all right, I'm going to take you to a peaceful place, peaceful surroundings. So we got in the car. We drove off about a mile. There was a wonderful cemetery, a Catholic cemetery you may know. Is before they open them, they bless them with holy water, holy oils. It's a very holy, sacred ground, and that's where we'll go. And there's many saints buried there because there's many saints we never even know about. So I like to walk on the roads. And I don't walk among the tombstones, but I walk on the roads, and I pray and I meditate. There's beautiful scenery there. There's trees, green grass. There's beautiful statues. So I took them there. As we drove in, I pointed out we were going to park somewhere in a quarter-mile radius in a beautiful section. I said, look, you pick what place you want to park in, and that's where we'll go. Jesus inspired me to do that, as you see why in a second. So he said, yeah, let's park over there under a tree. So I pulled in under the tree. I got out of the car. He got out of the car, but he never moved. He was frozen outside of the car, frozen, staring at the tombstone. So I went over and asked him, what's the problem? He said, Tony, this tombstone has my name on it, my first name and my last name on this tombstone. And this guy died 40 years ago, and I'm just blown away. And I said, well, it's a good thing you picked it. I didn't pick the parking place. You'd think I set you up. Well, his whole life changed after that miraculous event, you see. I took him off to a cemetery, and he gets out. He picks the place. He sees his name. I got to tell you, he did a lot more praying after that day than ever before.
Yeah.
Now, the other one I got to tell you before we run out of time is called the Tabernacle Breeze. This is a flabbergasting miracle. I was going to a church for about 2 years. Whenever I could, on the way home, I passed by a church. So whenever I could, I would go in for a visit, and I would tell them all my problems for the day, and I'd tell him what was driving me nuts at the office. We'd have great discussions. He would teach me many things. He even taught me some accounting principles even. I talked to Jesus, an empty Catholic church. Well, I would sit up front, close to the tabernacle, dead center, and this one day, after about 2 years of visiting every day, I started feeling a cool breeze. A cool breeze was blowing on my face, something like a fireman's hose was connected to the tabernacle, and the fireman's hose was up against my face, blowing a cool breeze, a gentle breeze. And I was amazed because it never happened in 2 years. And then suddenly it stopped, and now the cool breeze started blowing on the side of my face, and it was coming up from the floor. On the right side of the church up front, it was coming from there. The hose was now connected that way. So I got up, I walked over, and sure enough, there was a Eucharistic host on the floor up there in the front of the church. Somebody dropped it there, and I could see it had been stepped on. And so I bring this up as a miracle, people, because, you know, people say that the presence of God is in the Holy Eucharist. Some people believe it, some people don't believe it. But I was in a church where a cool breeze was blowing from the tabernacle, where the Holy Eucharist, the Blessed Sacrament, is. And it stopped, the breeze stopped. Then it's blowing on the side of my face. I get up and go look at where the destination, where the breeze was coming from, and I found a host. So I have to say to the whole world, you know, I'm not telling you what religion to. If you make God your friend, he'll take you to the right religion for you. But I have no doubt, when people tell me they don't believe the Eucharist is the presence of God, I always tell them this. And it happened again 2 years later in a different church. So I'm positive the Holy Eucharist, the Blessed Sacrament, is the presence of Jesus, and he's my best friend.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I would hasten to add, I know we're running out of time, everybody has a total presence of Jesus with them all day, spiritually. It's like God has duplicated himself 7 billion times. 7 billion times. He has a perfect Christ present to every single person on the planet Earth, invisible. And when you go to a Catholic church, he comes with you into the church invisibly, but he's also there tangibly, physically, in the form of bread. All right, we may be out of time, Joe. I don't know. Did I make it?
No, we're okay. But I'd say my one of my locutions, the one I stood up in the guard station and started singing spontaneously, is one sip of wine, one bread in your time, one hope for mankind.
Wow, that's beautiful. Can I squeeze one more miracle in?
Definitely. We still have 8 minutes. You're okay. All
right, great, because this will help your listeners. I was reading the Bible one day in the book of Revelation. If you read the book of Revelation, you know that it says the number for the devil is 666. So I said to God, gee, you know what? God, 666 is the only number I see in the Bible. Are there other meanings to other numbers? And he said yes, and he got me on a research project. So I did. I researched, and I found out what the meanings of all the other numbers are. And it's not hocus pocus. I put in my book an exhibit that explains every one of the numbers. Now, I just want to tell your audience about one other number, 777. 777 is the number attributed to God, like 666 is the number attributed to the devil. And when you see somebody with a license plate, 666 or 777, it doesn't mean they're the devil. It doesn't mean that they are God. I see a P.O. box number, it's a P.O. box number. When you see an address, it's an address. You see a phone number, it's a phone number. Don't point at somebody and say, oh, you got your number 666, so you must be the devil. Don't do that, because the numbers are also numbers. However, authors, when they were writing, if they don't want to write the name of the devil, they can write 666. And if they don't want to, like the Jews never want to mention the name God, they would use the number 777. So authors can do that. Now, here's what I want to tell you, audience, that is so amazing. The number for God is 777. Now, watch this. Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, Bethlehem, which means, by the way, the word Bethlehem means house of bread. That's what it means. Well, Bethlehem is 777 meters above sea level. Now, when I found that out, Jesus said, why don't you check how many meters Golgotha, Skull Hill, is? And I did. The place where Jesus died is also 777 meters above sea level. So where God created the whole universe, he made this planet, which is a speck of dust. And when he made the planet, he made Bethlehem 777 meters above sea level. And then he made Skull Hill, Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, 777 meters above sea level. And the last thing I'll say about it is, thousands of years before Jesus was born, the Jews held the number 7 as the holiest of numbers. Okay, I'm glad I got that in, Joe.
That's great. Wouldn't want to know where 666 altitude is. That would be interesting.
Well, that's right. It might be an interesting project, but I have not been assigned that project.
Well, I know that under where Christ was crucified, they found the bones of Adam, right?
That's correct. That's right. Very good.
So there's a lot of signs that some people don't even think about, you know.
Exactly right.
Well, that's a very interesting thing there.
So how much time do we have left?
I wanted to bring up this one thing. You know, you're talking about 7 meaning Jesus, 777. You know, this one of these things that my friend Richard Rohr talks about is Yahweh, the word Yahweh. Have you heard anything about that, the Yahweh word, that's the sacred word that the Jews used for God, and it was sacred, that wasn't even to be spoken. The reason it wasn't even to be spoken is because when you say Yahweh, that is the actual sound of our inspiration and our expiration. Every time we breathe in, we are saying Yah, because there's no consonants, and every time we breathe out, we're saying Way. And the reason I said it couldn't be said is because it didn't have to be said. That's the noise of breath. And we have 7 million breaths in a day. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, and our first breath when we were born as a child was saying God's name. Yahweh, when we took our first breath, we were saying God's name. And when we take our last breath, we're going to be saying God's name for the last time before we meet Him, go in front of Him.
That's beautiful, Joe. Beautiful.
And it's sacred. It's sacred because our breath is as sacred as anything else, because our breath is the Spirit of God coming in and out, right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Joe. That was beautiful. I had not heard that.
Anything else you want to share? We have a couple of minutes. Let me see.
All right.
We have exactly 2 minutes. Just have a 1 minute share.
Yep. Okay. I got 51,000. The one I'll share is called My Son's Den Mother. My son was young, and he wanted to become a Cub Scout. And so my wife and I talked about it. She was working. I was working. She was busy. So we agreed I would take it on. I would go and do the Den Mother work this year for the first year. So I went to the first meeting. I found out there's no Den Mothers is right because it was all women. I was the only guy there. I had a red face on. One of the Den Mothers came to me and said, don't worry, Tony. We'll help you. And here's a book. Here's a book to read. So the next day I had to fly to California. I took the book with me. I'm up in the plane. I'm up above the clouds. I opened the book to start to read it, and here's what it said. Eric wanted to become a Cub Scout, but his mother could not be the Den Mother, so his father decided to be the Den Mother that year. That's what the book said, and my son's name is Eric. So I had to squeeze that one in.
Very good. So I'm going to close with this. May you all have miracles like me and Tony are having May you see miracles in everything, including your breath. And may the light of the Lord's constant shine upon you, as it does through the sun and everything else in this world. When you start to see God all in all, you know you're home. You're almost in heaven already. God bless you. Thank you for being on, Tony.
Thank you,
We're about
Joe.
out of time. Do you have a closing one-liner?
Talk to God about everything. It'll change your life to a wonderful life.
It's heaven all the way to heaven when you find Him. God bless you, Tony, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.